From an automotive industry perspective, why does the semiconductor industry start to talk about supply chain localization and decentralization?
I think we got here by a number of reasonable steps, because what happened, I remember when I was a young engineer, and it would cost, maybe $1 billion to build a fab, which back then $1 billion was a lot of money. It now costs tens of billions of dollars. And what that did was when it was $1 billion to build a fab, for all the large semiconductor supply companies, they could afford to build their own fabs. As it became more and more expensive, it became prohibitive even for those big semiconductor suppliers, with the exception of Intel and Samsung, to build their own internal fabs for these leading process nodes. They couldn't afford to build a fab and keep it full just on their own demands. What they ended up doing was kind of constructing this outsourced model. It started being called asset light. And what it meant was the semiconductor companies were building fewer and fewer of those assets internally. So they were asset light from the semiconductor manufacturer standpoint, because they were relying on third parties, the TSMCs of the world, to become the foundry partners. And it made sense because at the beginning, you use the foundries a little bit, and you still had a lot of internal capacity, and you could use the foundries kind of to balance out fluctuations in your demand. What's happened over the years was the semiconductor companies just pushed more and more of their new process node development into foundries. So now what the semiconductor companies have are very mature process nodes, tend to be in-house. And the very advanced process nodes tend to be out of house. And the problem is, like we have now, you become dependent on fewer and fewer parts of the supply chain. So now, TSMC supplies, over half of the MCUs in the automotive industry. No OEM or tier ones buying them directly from TSMC. But when you look at the supply chain through the semiconductor suppliers, they're all using TSMC for MCUs, and that ratio is going to be even more pronounced for the more leading edge technologies like SoCs and things that are just starting to make their way into automotive. So we got here as semiconductor companies are trying to run their companies responsibly and minimize their investment in kind of bleeding edge technology of today. But by doing that now, a situation was set up where over decades, it just pushed all that capacity to somebody else.
How would the idea of localization affect global supply chain?
That's a really interesting question. And it's interesting because it depends on how the supply chain is going to respond. So right now, when we talk about changing the foundry supply chain, well, we're not really seeing many new players. We're seeing TSMC, instead of concentrating everything in Taiwan, they're going to put some capacity in Japan. They're going to put some capacity in Europe. They're going to put some capacity in North America. But it's still going to be TSMC. At these advanced process nodes, it's still going to be Samsung, TSMC, and Intel that are going to be the main providers of those. Even before the pandemic, Samsung has a facility in Texas. TSMC has a facility in Arizona. Intel just announced they're going to put a fab in Ohio. I think that part of it makes sense, but for a different reason. If it's going to be the same companies managing these supply locations, I don't know that fundamentally changes the decision-making process. If they're in different parts of the world, what that does do is, if there's an ice storm in Texas, it'll take the Texas fab offline, but it won't affect the fab in Europe. If there's a fire at a facility in Japan, it'll take that offline, but it won't affect the facilities in Taiwan. So, some of this is, the trying to combat different potentials for supply disruption. Sometimes it's, geopolitical and macroeconomic, and sometimes it's just a matter of something happened at one particular location. So if you have those scattered, you certainly fix the second part. I don't know what it does to the first part.